Margaret Stivers is a wing walker extraordinaire. She works without a parachute. Today we have Margaret Stivers with us, and she's an honest-to-goodness, authentic wing walker. Margaret, welcome to Aviation Theater.
Thank you very much.
First of all, would you tell our viewers where you were born and grew up?
I was born in Rochester, New York. I grew up in upstate New York, and I currently live now in Chino, California.
How did you get from the Atlantic Ocean, New York, to the Pacific Ocean, California?
After college, I came out here to find a job, and I went to Santa Barbara.
Where did you go to college?
Clemson, South Carolina.
Why did you go to South Carolina to go to college?
It had a great architectural school. I went for the architectural.
You studied architecture?
Yes.
And after college, you moved here to California?
That's correct.
Why did you move here?
Well, my parents actually had moved here a couple of years ago, and I came out here to be with them.
To Santa Barbara?
To Santa Barbara, correct.
At one time, Santa Barbara had the name of the busiest small airport in the United States. That's not true anymore, is it?
It's a pretty busy, big airport.
So you moved out here to California, and you're a licensed pilot. Tell us about how you became a pilot.
Well, I actually started flying gliders. I had a friend that was in architecture that introduced me to flying, and I loved it. I went for a powered lesson, and I immediately fell in love with the power. And
Did you get a glider rating?
No, I did not finish the glider rating.
Did you fly in a 222 or a 233?
I flew in a Balonic.
Oh, the good stuff.
So then I went to Above All Aviation, and I learned to fly in Santa Barbara at Above All.
I learned to fly in gliders originally with a German Luftwaffe pilot who was trained by Hermann Göring.
Oh my goodness.
After World War I, Germany was not allowed to have airplanes, so Göring established glider clubs all over Germany, and he trained the Luftwaffe. And many people say that you're a much better pilot if you learn to fly in gliders first. What do you think about that? Did it help?
Yeah, I think you learn energy management and how to manage your altitude and airspeed and judge the distance for landing and preparing for a landing, especially if your engine goes out.
So you started in gliders and then you moved into powered airplanes. I assume a Cessna 150?
That's correct.
And you earned your license in a Cessna 150, and then what?
Actually, a Cessna 152. And
oh, that's right. They changed from a 150 to a 152, and they changed from a Continental engine to a Lycoming.
That's also correct. It was a Lycoming. And I actually had a commission of drawing a biplane, a Stearman biplane, and I thought, how is this plane built? And I would really love to fly it. So I came out to Chino, to the Stearman Flight Center, and I had a ride, and Hartley Falstead, who's now flying me, was the gentleman that gave me the ride. He let me do loops and rolls and try and land it, and that was it. I was hooked. And I came out, I came back. That's what inspired me to get my license. I said, what do I have to do to fly this? And he said, get your license in 150 hours and come back. I did. He let me solo it. I have about 500 hours in the Stearman.
A Stearman takes off at 70, climbs out at 70, cruises at 70, dives at 70, and lands at 70. But it's a good airplane.
Well, I think it dives a little faster than that. For the loops and rolls, you get up to about 130 knots.
Tell our viewers, when you're on downwind at Chino Airport, tell our viewers what you fly over.
Prisons and cows.
Every time I've gone into Chino on downwind, there's always a bunch of people waving, come on down, pick me up. So you took class in the Stearman at Chino, and we're still not wing walking. You're still a licensed pilot flying a Cessna 152 and now a Stearman. So tell us what happened after you started flying the Stearman.
Well, Hartley was involved in an airshow team, and it was actually based here at Torrance around the Long Beach area, flying for the Queen Mary, and it was the Royal Flying Circus with Walt Disney Company. And he was one member of a team. They had another wing walker, and I did a lot of video of her wing walking and a lot of photos. I'd been around her wing walking. It was Chris Alba, who's still a very good friend of mine, and I knew I was around air shows and just knew about it, and then we formed our own team. Hartley did. He had his own plane. That team disbanded. And
you just mentioned one of the wing walkers. We recently did an interview with Wally Schirra, one of the original 7 astronauts,
yeah.
And his mother was a wing walker.
Well, that sets him up for space, all right?
So you were doing video of another wing walker and obviously studying the techniques, and continue on.
I didn't try and study. I didn't have any plans to be a wing walker at that point. But when we formed our own team, we were out of town, and we had another wing walker. It was a gentleman, actually, and he couldn't.
Now, this was at Indio, I believe.
Indio, California, correct. And it was not loops and rolls. It was just flying over an area. And they needed a wing walker, and they looked at me, and I said, well, I'll try it. If I like it, I will do it. And I loved it.
So with no warning and no training and no advanced preparation, they needed a wing walker. Tell our viewers about the groundwork, because skydivers do that.
Yeah, I prepare pretty carefully on the ground for everything I do. Now my stunts take many months in preparation. Back the first time I did it, I just kind of practiced on the ground, figuring out where I'll put my hands and where I put my feet, and had the mental attitude that I could do it.
That's called a dry run.
Correct. I had quite a bit of practice up there on the ground first, but...
Okay, now tell our viewers, after you practiced on the ground, you got in the airplane, and tell our viewers what you did that first time.
Well, I climbed about halfway up, and I was hit with this incredible wall of air that I wasn't prepared for, and I decided, mentally, my brain was also asking me questions about the sanity of all this. So I climbed back down in the cockpit. And then I said, I always wanted to try this. It's like climbing Mount Everest. It's something you have inside of you that you want to do.
I'd like to mention that the fact that your brain questioned the sanity of this shows intellect. It shows that you have intelligence, because a brave person is not somebody who doesn't fear anything and does it. A brave person is someone who realizes the danger and realizes what they're involved in, and they grit their teeth and they go ahead and do it anyway. So that's true bravery. So what you do is true bravery.
Well, yeah, my brain was questioning it. and then I did it again. You have to really push through that wall of air the first time, and it is a wall, mentally as well, and physically is quite a pressure on you. And once I got up there, it was like the sun coming through the clouds, and it said, this is what I'm meant to do. I just knew it.
If you can visualize it, it's like a giant leaf blower hitting you with a 70-mile-per-hour wind.
It's like sticking your head out a sunroof.
Okay, so you climbed up a second time, and then what?
I got up there and I started dancing. I just started dancing.
Now, is that figuratively or literally?
Literally. I just started dancing. I loved it.
And how long were you up that first time?
Oh, I don't remember.
Well, euphoria set in. So you performed successfully your very first time. You came back down on the ground, and then what happened?
Well, actually, the practice was the day before the show. I just didn't want to do the show cold turkey. And then I didn't get any sleep that night, mind you, and then I did it the next day.
We want to hear about the rest of your adventures right after we come back from this important message. Welcome back to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. Would you tell our viewers what your routine consists of? And I'll stop you after each maneuver and you can explain in detail.
Okay, for an air show, it's a little slightly different from an aerobatic show. For the Torrance Airfair, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to take off out on the javelin of one wing.
What is a javelin?
The javelin is this stick right over there. I'm going to be laying
It's the
flat.
stick that's in between the flying wires.
It's a stick in between the flying wires. I'm going to be lying on it face down so I can see the ground, and I'll be taking off from that position, and that is actually the only rush in wing walking, as you see the ground pass you by at a considerable speed and lift up.
So you won't be taking off inside the airplane, you'll actually be out on the wing.
I will be out on the wing. I'll be actually hanging over the ground.
So the wing takes off, does climb out, goes upwind, and then what?
Well, the minute it takes off, I'm going to stand up and I'll start waving to the crowd as we come by. Then I'm going to go into the cockpit. I'm going to climb out to the other side of the
You'll go from the one wing into the cockpit of the airplane.
Correct, and then I'll be climbing out of the cockpit again onto the opposite wing, where I'll be climbing out to the end strut. Now the end strut is the end configuration.
All the way to the outboard.
All the way to the outboard, correct. At the end strut, I'm going to go slightly in front of it. It's a little tricky. I'm going to wrap my legs around the end strut. I'm going to lower myself down, and I'm going to hang backwards at the end strut.
All right, and then what?
Well, then I'm going to get back up, and I'm going to climb.
If everything goes right.
It better go right. No, it will go. I'll climb back to the cockpit again, and I'm going to be climbing up to the top wing of the plane.
You'll climb from the end of the wing back into the cockpit, and then back up to the post or to your special seat up there?
I'll be climbing back up in front of the wing walking rack. And from there, I'm going to stand on my head. And in an aerobatic show, what we normally do is loops with me standing on my head. For airfares where the airspace is not wavered for aerobatics, I'll be flying by the crowd, standing on my head. I do splits.
You'll be standing upside down on your head on the rack on top of the top wing.
It's actually a forearm stand. It's not really a headstand. It's a forearm stand. Then I push up, and it's really more of a handstand than a headstand. And I use it, and I bend over backwards with my feet, and I try and touch the top of my head like this.
So you're not satisfied just to be out there on the wing or on the rack. You stand upside down on your head.
That's correct. I saw one wing walker do that before I ever started wing walking, and that impressed me. It meant that they were working and doing things that were difficult on the ground, let alone, in a wind tunnel configuration. And so I wanted to, for the crowd, go beyond what most people can imagine is possible, so that hopefully in their life they can also go beyond and reach their goals.
I have a medical question, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay. But in a situation like this, a human's balance is in the ear. You have the cochlea with the little hairs and the fluid inside the ear, and there's a bubble there, much like a carpenter's level, and that gives you your sense of balance. When you're upside down in an airplane doing loops,
It's like an outside loop.
does that mix up the bubble on your balance?
It actually takes practice, and it takes a certain amount of conditioning to get into shape, and we go out and practice it. So yeah, it does take conditioning.
Have you suffered any effects of that?
Not to my knowledge.
Would it be similar to children going around in a circle in the front yard, or do you feel any after effects of that?
Well, when I do a loop standing on my head, my body has actually experienced negative G's rather than positive G's because I'm upside down. So what the body's going through, it would be like a pilot doing an outside loop versus an inside loop in the cockpit. And
Well, now we need to mention that an outside loop was not accomplished for many years because it's very difficult. So your body is accomplishing an outside loop.
correct. That's the equivalent of what I'm doing, correct, right. And the blood flows differently and all sorts of things. And, the feet, go numb and things like that if I'm upside down too long a time. little details like that.
And in astronaut training, they learned that your eyes actually bulge out from the sockets also.
Well, I never look at my eye when I'm up there, but I think it's usually flattened back to my the end of my skull.
So you experience all kinds of physical manifestations when you're doing this. And I think that we should mention at this time that you are, what, 5 feet?
Correct.
100 pounds?
103.
So we have a wing walker here who's 5 feet tall, 103 pounds, who has the courage and the daring and the bravery to not only climb out of the cockpit of the airplane, but to go on the wings and turn upside down and do all sorts of things. Now, you do something that other people don't do. Would you tell our viewers about the back rack? Is that right?
Well, actually, it's working behind the rack, and it's working in the airstream, which is actually pretty difficult because there's very little to hang on to back there.
Now, other wing walkers don't do this?
Very few do, and Alan Silver, actually the announcer here, was one of the people that was very instrumental in giving me some safety advice off the back of the
He's
rack.
also a skydiver.
That's correct, and working in the airstream. And what I do is I flip my feet. First I anchor my feet, I bend back over, do a back bend, I anchor my hands, then I flip my feet in the air and shake hands with the pilot.
Okay, let's say that again slowly, one step at a time.
I anchor my feet, I do a back bend over, anchor my hands, and then I flip my feet in the air. So I'm basically doing a handstand, and then I shake hands with the pilot.
And you're holding on to the airplane with your earlobes, or what?
My hands.
But then you shake hands with the pilot.
Yeah, I've got a good grip. He gives me a good grip there. He's kind of anchoring me as well. And I also do loops and rolls off the back of the rack, just holding on. So I'm holding on to the back of the rack as we're going around doing loops.
An amazing performance. Tell our viewers about your activities, because you're very busy doing wing walking.
Yeah, actually it's my whole focus, and it takes a lot of preparation time. Each stunt takes minimum now about 3 months of preparation on the ground, and it's always a lot of workout as well, 2.5 to 3 hours a day.
Now, you're based at Chino?
That's correct.
Tell us about your operations out of Chino.
Well, what we have are Stearmans. It's the Stearman Flight Center there as well, and primarily what we do is air shows and aerobatic air shows and airfares. We also have a movie manual where we do movie work, and we can waiver airspace for film and video, and we do some commercials as well as we give rides.
Is this your first time here at Torrance?
This is the second year I've been here, and I'm very glad that they asked us back. They treat us real well.
So our viewers can pretty much expect to see you here at Torrance Air Show every year?
Well, if they invite me, I will come.
Very good. If they're traveling and they go out to Chino, would they be able to see you doing something out there?
No, it'd be kind of difficult because when we go practice, we go to a special area, and normally we stay quite high, about 1,000.
Plus, you're on the road a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, we do air shows around the Southwest, so you better call first.
Now, you've flown gliders, you've flown airplanes, you've done wing walking. Have you made any parachute jumps?
No. I don't wear a parachute. I think wearing a parachute is dangerous because if it deployed when I was out between the wires or in front of the rack, it would not only take me apart but also part of the plane. So I choose not to wear a parachute.
Let's emphasize that, ladies and gentlemen. She does not wear a parachute. She does all of these maneuvers that she has described without wearing a parachute. Now, there are two things I wanted to mention quickly. One is there's a difference between a wing walker and a wing something else.
A wing rider. A wing rider stays in one place on the plane and does not move around the plane. A wing walker goes from one position to the plane to another and does other things like that.
10, 12 years ago, I saw a Los Angeles car dealer who was a wing rider. Would you tell our viewers who did that?
Cal Worthington, I believe.
Cal Worthington, in one of his commercials, was shown on the rack on a Stearman flying around. So he was just there on the rack, immobile, so he is what would be called a wing rider. But in your situation, you're a wing walker because you go all over the wing, in and out of the airplane. You do aerobics, acrobatics, everything else.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers about your performance?
No, all the stunts I do start very slowly from visualizations, and they usually take a year through practice in the air and experience on working toward that goal. And so when I perform them, they're pretty much been practiced and practiced and practiced. And I hope when I perform that, because it is a little different and unusual, that they can reach within their own heart and their own soul and attain their own goals that they would like to see visualized.
Very good. We'll be back right after this important message.
Hey, San Diego, it's time to get up close and personal with a history of aviation, and there's no better place than the San Diego Aerospace Museum. See warbirds like the P-40 Warhawk, the P-51 Mustang, and modern-day jets such as the F-18 and the F-14 Tomcat, all brought back to life by the men who flew them. And it's all waiting for you at the San Diego Aerospace Museum in beautiful Balboa Park and our restoration facilities at Gillespie Field and El Cajon. Come fly with us soon.
Welcome back to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what's going on here at the Torrance Airfair in addition to your performance? I know there's a lot of activities.
Well, yes, there is. The Flying Wing is here from the Plains of Fame in Chino, as well as the Cool Cut Showcopters, which give a tremendous act. I remember seeing them here last year.
Can you tell our viewers just a little bit about that Flying Wing?
The Flying Wing is from the Plains of Fame Museum. It was built up from scratch, and it's magnificent to see fly. I remember the first time they test flew it out at Chino. Don Likings was flying it, and they had to turn off the engines. I forgot the problem, but he did an excellent landing, and it was quite exciting to watch. I was up in the tower watching.
It's a wing only, no fuselage, no tail. And the dancing helicopters.
The dancing helicopters, right, and they do dance. They're pretty exciting to watch as well. And John Culver does a wonderful act that gives a tribute to the American veterans in his T-6. And then there's an assembly of rare, beautifully restored aircraft flying.
They have antique and experimental airplanes here.
That's correct, all the way from a Fokker triplane to some of the heavy metal.
You know the owner and the pilot of the triplane, don't you?
Yes, and he also flies me on the wing. It's a good team effort between the two of us. I couldn't do it without him.
The Fokker triplane is what you see in Peanuts, the Red Baron's airplane that Snoopy flies in the cartoons. One other thing that we want to talk about is parachute jumping, because a friend of yours opens the show with a parachute.
That's correct. And I have never had a parachute jump. I've had the opportunity offered to me many times, but because I don't wear one, I've chosen not to go that route. And I have a lot of respect for those guys and gals that do it.
Who is the parachute jumper that opens the show?
Alan Silver, and he's also the announcer. He's announcing with his son, Darren. And Alan actually used to wing walk from Eddie Andrini's airplane.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yes, Alan used to be a wing walker a long time ago. And he actually used to jump from the plane as a closing act.
Oh, he was a wing walker, and then at the closing of his wing walking act, he would jump from the plane.
That's correct, yes. And he was very instrumental in giving me a lot of advice.
Very good. Thank you so much for being with us today. Very special thanks to Margaret Stivers, wing walker extraordinaire. Well, that's our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. Until next week, this is Captain Fred saying, God bless America and happy landing!